Ahead in this edition of The Human Body, you'll find out how the nervous system acts as the body's internet, sending and receiving massive amounts of information, pictures, and ideas, and how it does it at extremely high speeds. Also, you'll discover how the spinal cord acts as the critical relay station between the brain and the rest of the body. You'll also learn about the vital roles of sensory receptors and motor neurons in gathering information and carrying out orders from the brain. Ultimately, you'll learn how the brain and nervous system combine to control everything you do, from voluntary muscle movement to thought, from sensing pain to regulating blood pressure. Discover why the brain and nervous system are your information superhighway. Hello, I am Mike Dowling, and welcome to The Human Body. You know, every sunrise you see, every ice cream you taste, every decision you make about what to have for breakfast, what clothes to wear to work or school, or feeling bad about being late to the office or classroom, even driving in traffic and reacting to the crossing guard or the stoplight. All of these functions are intimately linked to the brain. The fact is, every decision you make, every emotion you experience, everything you do is a product of your brain. Some morning, study your bowl of oatmeal. It has the same consistency as the brain. Although not necessarily the body's most attractive organ, the brain is nothing short of remarkable. It is a complex powerhouse encased within the skull. Reporter Kim Clay takes a look.
The brain is one of the most active organs of the body. The more mental activity you undertake, the more oxygen your brain consumes. Oxygen is fed to the brain by a steady flow of blood. Though it makes up only about 2% of the body's total weight, the brain uses over 20% of the body's blood supply.
In its complexity, the brain beats any of the most powerful computer that are available these days or that will be anticipated in the next few years at least, because of the functions that it is responsible for and that it delivers.
It is an organ that weighs only 3 pounds, but it contains 1 trillion nerve cells or neurons. These neurons are the foundation for the entire nervous system. The nervous system is a remarkably well-integrated network. Every thought, action, and emotion is a result of its activity. In the body, there are 2 components to the nervous system. There is the central nervous system, or CNS, which is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. They issue commands based on past experiences and current information. There is also the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. It is the nervous system which exists outside the CNS. It consists mainly of nerves which carry impulses to and from the spinal cord and the brain.
The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system is all the outlays or cables or nerves that go from the spinal cord outwards to the different limbs, to the gut, to all the organs of the body.
Within the PNS, there is the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. The autonomic is called the involuntary nervous system because it manages functions we can't consciously control. These include digestion, respiration, contraction of the irises in the eyes, regulation of heart rate, blood pressure, and metabolism. The somatic system is referred to as the voluntary nervous system. It allows us to consciously control body movements. The peripheral nervous system consists of nerves or neurons that convey impulses or information from sensory receptors located throughout the body. Information is transmitted from the skin, skeletal muscles and joints, and internal organs via the PNS. It takes the information and uses it to keep the brain up to date on conditions inside and outside the body.
The role of neurons, nerve cells, in the peripheral nervous system is really twofold. They act as wires conducting signals from the spinal cord to the surface of the body in the legs or feet or arms, and they also conduct sensory impulses from the skin back to the spinal cord.
There are 3 types of neurons: sensory, motor, and association neurons. They serve to relay impulses from receptors in outlying parts of the body to the central nervous system and then return signals from the CNS to the muscles and glands. Here's how it all works. A stimulus, like heat from the stove, causes a signal to travel through sensory neurons. It's then transmitted across association neurons in the spinal cord via links called synapses. A response is then carried via motor neurons to an effector organ, often a muscle, which then performs a movement. In this case, it's a hand that pulls away from the stove. All impulses that are carried from one neuron to another have to travel across junctions or links called synapses. This electrical conduction of information between neurons is the basis of all human activity and learning. I'm Kim Clay reporting.
The brain and nervous system act as the body's internet, sending and receiving massive amounts of information. The brain itself makes up only about 2% of the body's weight. The brain contains 1 trillion nerve cells, or neurons. The nervous system has 2 components, the central nervous system, or CNS, which is made up of the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, or PNS, consisting mainly of nerves which carry impulses to and from the spinal cord and brain. Within the PNS, there is the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. The somatic nervous system is called the voluntary nervous system, which allows us to consciously control body movements. The autonomic nervous system is called the involuntary nervous system, controlling digestion, respiration, regulation of heart rate, blood pressure, and metabolism. Neurons are the critical communication tools which transmit information from one part of the body to another. The 3 types of neurons are sensory, motor, and association neurons. They relay impulses from receptors in outlying parts of the body to the central nervous system and then return signals from the CNS to muscles and glands.
Despite being symmetrical in appearance, the 2 hemispheres of your brain are not necessarily similar in function. The left and right sides of the brain have very different responsibilities. The left hemisphere of your brain exerts more influence over physical movement on the right side of your body and vice versa. In fact, humans seem to be the only evolved species that shows the profound cerebral bias towards right-handedness. In fact, 9 out of 10 people are right-handed. Most other species are either ambidextrous or at least more balanced in their populations. Now, the left side of your brain also influences spoken and written language and scientific and mathematical ability. Your right hemisphere is linked to musical and artistic awareness as well as to imagination. Just like a computer system is made up of different components and run by different programs, the brain and nervous system are also comprised of different components. Each transmits information that is critical to the operation of different body and mental functions. In a fully developed brain, there are 4 main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the diencephalon, and the brainstem. Now, your ability to think, to speak, to smell, and eat, even your memory, these functions are just a few of the capabilities which have their origins in your brain's cerebrum. As Jason Hawkins reports, the cerebrum is one of the brain's most critical components.
The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain and is divided into 2 main hemispheres, which each control the opposite side of the body. In other words, the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and vice versa.
The cerebrum is covered by a mass of cells about 1/8 of an inch thick. This gray matter is referred to as the cerebral cortex. Beneath the cortex is the cerebral white matter, which serves as the connection between the cortex and the rest of the brain.
The ability to appreciate a beautiful view, to walk or run, to understand the potential for danger in given situations are all the product of the cerebral cortex. It is divided into the sensory areas, the motor areas, and the association areas.
The sensory areas of the cerebrum receive stimuli from different parts of the body. The visual area receives impulses from the eyes and interprets shapes and colors. The auditory area analyzes sound, including pitch and rhythm. The gustatory and olfactory areas assess taste and smell. All of the information gathered is integrated in the gnostic area.
Also within the cerebrum is the primary motor area. It controls voluntary muscle movements. Moving your hand, running down the street, and lifting a heavy box are all movements that originate within this area.
The motor area generates impulses that cause muscles to contract in specific sequences. Your ability to type at a keyboard is a perfect example of the integration between muscle groups and contraction. It's the function of the association areas of the cerebrum to connect the sensory and motor areas. The association areas are involved with memory, emotions, personality, and intelligence. I'm Jason Hawkins reporting.
The cerebellum is the second largest portion of the brain. It controls precise coordination movements, posture, and balance. It also helps coordinate exact timing of skeletal muscle movements. Peter Gailey has more on this precise integration.
It's fluid, graceful, and strong. The movement of the human body is a well-orchestrated event controlled by the cerebellum.
The cerebellum makes up almost 20% of the brain's mass, occupying the lower rear portion of the cranial cavity.
It regulates coordination and balance by gauging sensory messages from the body and comparing what the body is actually doing with what the brain intended. It then makes small justifications and adjustments so that fluid motion and balance are enabled.
The cerebellum is just an amazing part of the brain. It has pre-programmed sequences of muscle contractions that result in movement. Just to give you an example, to do this is actually several muscles moving, and they're coordinating their movements with each other. To bend my finger, I have to not only make several muscles on this side contract, at the same time I have to make several muscles on this side relax. And it's your cerebellum that does that without even having to think about it.
The cerebellum is also involved in reading signs from the inner ear and gauging equilibrium. It then transmits impulses to muscles, which then contract to maintain balance. But not only is the cerebellum involved in movement, it's also believed to play a role in regulating smoothness of thinking and mood.
We don't know a lot about the role of the cerebellum in emotions. What we think is that the cerebellum has a role in smoothing things out in terms of emotions. For example, in attention deficit disorder, where people have a hard time focusing down on any given task, what we think the cerebellum does is to try to sort through and coordinate and organize a lot of the inputs that are coming into a person so that he can hone down on what he's doing. When the cerebellum isn't working right, you get something called attention deficit disorder, where somebody can't really focus down and gets distracted by all of the stimuli in his environment. Another example would be obsessive compulsive disorder, where a person thinks about a certain thought over and over and over again, or he does a certain ritual over and over and over again. We think that the cerebellum may have a role in starting and stopping thoughts and emotions. And when the cerebellum isn't working right, then you get this symptom of obsessive thinking or compulsive actions.
Besides the cerebellum, intense feelings have also been attributed to the diencephalon, which is the portion of the brain which sits atop the brain stem. It is encased by the cerebrum and is made up of the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the metathalamus, and the epithalamus. The epithalamus manufactures the cerebral spinal fluid, which acts as a cushion for the CNS. The thalamus acts as a relay station for impulses from the spinal cord into the brain. This gives the first notification if the impulse is pain or pleasure. The metathalamus contains the medial and lateral geniculate bodies, which coordinate parts of balance and eye movement.
The hypothalamus is very important to many body functions. Besides being a control center for emotions like rage and aggression, it helps maintain physical conditions like body temperature, metabolism, water balance, and sleep.
The brainstem connects the rest of the brain to the spinal cord. and is about the size of your thumb. It controls many of the automatic functions of the body, including breathing and heart rate. It has three main parts: the pons, the medulla oblongata, and the midbrain.
The pons directly connects your brain with your spinal cord and influences breathing.
The midbrain controls several body functions, including some eye movement, facial sensation, and chewing.
The medulla oblongata merges directly into the spinal cord and is the lowest part of the brain stem. It helps to regulate breathing along with the pons, but also regulates heartbeat, blood pressure, swallowing, and the vomit reflex. I'm Peter Gailey, reporting.
The four main parts of the brain are the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the diencephalon, and the brainstem. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain and is divided into two main hemispheres which each control the opposite side of the body. The cerebral cortex is divided into the sensory areas, the motor areas, and the association areas. Also within the cerebrum is the primary motor area, which controls voluntary muscle movements. The left side of the brain influences spoken and written language and scientific and mathematical ability. The right hemisphere is linked to musical and artistic awareness, as well as to imagination. The cerebellum is the large cauliflower-looking mass which occupies the lower rear part of the brain cavity and regulates coordination and balance. The cerebellum is also believed to play a role in regulating smoothness of thinking and mood. The diencephalon is the portion of the brain that sits atop the brainstem. The brainstem connects the rest of the brain to the spinal cord and is about the size of your thumb. It controls many of the functions of the body, including breathing and heart rate. It has three main parts: the pons, the medulla oblongata, and the midbrain.
Like the interconnectedness of computer systems, it's clear that nothing in the nervous system works independently. If any system malfunctions, it impacts the other components. As we reported earlier, for the brain to perform its role as your command and control center, it must depend on the spinal cord to serve as a two-way conduction system and to carry information to the rest of the body. Reporter Ross Joel has more on the spinal cord and its makeup.
Sports like football are built on high-intensity impact. Players dedicate themselves to hitting their opponents. It is the nature of the game to target the competition with what sometimes are described as back-breaking tackles.
As a football player, I take about 30 to 40 good solid shots every game. What I can relate it to is putting on a heavy winter coat and running into a garage door 30 to 40 times in about an hour and a half. That's about what it feels like.
To witness some hits in football is to marvel at the durability of the human body and its systems. Nature has gone to especially great lengths to protect the spinal cord and the brain. The spinal cord is just 17 inches long and is an extension of the brainstem. It is encased in the vertebral column and runs from the base of the skull down the back, ending just below the ribs. Besides the skull and vertebral column, the spinal cord and brain are also protected by a watery cushion called cerebrospinal fluid.
The central nervous system has a number of protective mechanisms. It's a very important part of keeping us alive, so the body is built to protect it from danger and injury. There's a couple different types of protection. One is hard protection or bony protection, like your hard skull that surrounds your brain to protect it from blows, and the vertebral column, which is a series of bones surrounding your spinal column that protects that from injury as well. Inside of that is a water bath. It's not really water, it's cerebrospinal fluid that helps cushion the brain and the spinal column from injuries, so that if you have a hard jolt, your brain doesn't smack against the side of your skull. It moves about more gently in that fluid and protects it from injury.
It is critical that the spinal cord be able to withstand potential injury because of the importance of its function. It is like the modem on a computer, serving to link computer brain to information to response. Like a hookup on a computer, it transmits information and requests from the brain to receptors or websites. It then downloads that information back to the PC or brain, which then formulates a response to that data.
Your brain is the control center for your information superhighway. Just as data is transmitted across the internet via cable and fiber optics, information is relayed to the different areas of the brain via nerve impulses. A wide range of stimuli can trigger nerves or neurons to activate and generate impulses. All of that information is transmitted from receptors to the neurons via electrical conduction. Neurons change their polarity from positive to negative as they are affected by different stimuli. Now, the degree to which this electrical conduction occurs is reflected in the amount of activity taking place in the cerebral cortex. In other words, the more stimuli you're exposed to, the more electrical impulses occur within your brain. These electrical impulses are called brain waves. Brain waves can be detected and measured by sensors called electrodes. A record of your brain waves is called an electroencephalogram, or EEG. EEGs measure 4 kinds of brain waves. Alpha waves register when the individual is awake and in a state of rest. Beta waves appear when the nervous system is stimulated during mental activity. Theta waves normally appear in people experiencing emotional stress. And the fourth, delta waves, are detected in infants or in adults with brain damage. In fact, EEGs are used to diagnose certain abnormalities like epilepsy, tumors, infectious diseases, and trauma.
The spinal cord carries messages back and forth between the body and the brain. Every response you have to situations or stimuli is the product of electrical conduction. These electrical impulses are called brain waves and are unique to every individual like fingerprints. An electroencephalogram, or EEG, measures 4 kinds of brain waves. Alpha, which register when an individual is awake or in a state of rest. Beta waves appear when the nervous system is stimulated. Theta waves normally appear in people experiencing emotional stress, and delta waves are detected in individuals with brain damage.
When you take the entire nervous system and integrate all its components, human beings are left with the ability to hear, smell, taste, see, and feel. Each of these 5 senses has its own specialized receptors. The gentle touch of a parent caressing a child. It is a very basic expression of emotion. The reality is touch, or the ability to feel, is also the most basic of the 5 senses. There are touch receptors all over the body, both inside and out, and they vary in concentration. The higher the concentrations, the more sensitive the area. In the skin, the receptors are referred to as the cutaneous sense organs, which sense pressure, temperature, touch, pain, and even vibration.
The importance of pain sensation, the ability to sense pain in our body, is that it helps protect us from various dangers. For instance, if something hurts, you will immediately pull away from it almost without realizing it because the pain reflex sets you up to do that. So if you are about to grab a hot pot on the stove, as soon as those pain fibers sense that extreme heat, they will cause you to jerk your hand away almost before you realize that the pot is hot. Or if you get extremely cold, your body will start to realize that as painful and get you to seek warmth or get out of that cold environment.
You know, a camera functions very much like your eyes. Like a camera, your eye is made up of many intricate components which regulate the amount of light which enters through its lens. In the eye, the sclera is the white of the eye and acts as a protective coating to the rest of the eyeball. The cornea is the clear portion in the middle of the sclera through which light passes. The iris is the colored circle of muscle that expands and contracts to allow a precise amount of light to pass through your pupil, which is the dark circle in the middle of your eye. Light enters the eye through the cornea, travels through the pupil, is refracted by the lens, and appears on the retina, where it stimulates the photoreceptors. Ultimately, the impulses travel to the optic nerve and finally to the brain. Obviously, your sense of sight is the result of a series of stimuli and responses. The same is true of your other senses. Pat Lorre has more.
It may be debatable that dogs are human beings' best friends, but there's no debating the fact that a canine's nose can outperform its master's. While smell is one of your more acute senses, your dog's nose is up to 5 million times more sensitive than yours. Despite paling in comparison to a dog's sense of smell, it does only take a few milliseconds for human beings to recognize a scent. and up to a minute to distinguish that particular smell from the general odor which is present.
Smell works by air being inspired in through your nose, and then the air is warmed up and actually saturated into what are called conchi. Those are the membranes within your nose. Those odors are saturated into the blood vessels, and then it's relayed onto the brain. In the dog, their ethmoidal conchi are much more vast. They are actually folded upon each other, and that makes their surface area greater, which enables them to actually have more odors that will be transmitted to the brain through the nerve endings and blood vessels.
Your ability to smell cookies baking or popcorn popping contributes to your ability to taste. The sense of taste works much in the same way as your sense of smell does. Indeed, taste couldn't happen without the interaction of the two senses. That's why it's difficult to taste something when you have a cold. There are about 10,000 taste buds on the tongue. It's divided up into different regions which are more sensitive to different tastes. Sweet covers most of the front of the tongue. Sour is located on the sides of the tongue. Salty is located on the tip and sides of the tongue. And bitter is located towards the back of the tongue. The ringing of chimes, a baby gurgling, or even a rock band. They are sounds with varying intensity. But working together, your ear and your brain are able to detect the degrees of difference. Your ear is made up of the outer, middle, and inner ear. Sound enters the outer ear through the auricle, the cup-shaped protrusion on the side of the head. It then travels about an inch into the head through the external auditory canal. Sound then strikes the tympanic membrane, commonly called the eardrum.
The purpose of the ear is to allow sounds from the environment to enter the nervous system and be interpreted for whatever significance they have. The way that happens is that the outer ear directs sounds through the ear canal to a membrane that's called the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. Just behind the eardrum, there's a series of 3 small bones that further transform this sound. First of all, the hammer, which is sort of glued to the eardrum, takes that vibration and picks it up and transfers it on to what's called the anvil or the uncus. This in turn transfers it on to the stirrup or the stapes, which touches the cochlea, which is a sensory organ, and that takes these vibrations and turns them into nervous impulse, just like light or touch or any of the other nervous impulses. And then your brain interprets it and acts accordingly.
Within the inner ear are hearing receptors, or hair cells. Once these cells are stimulated, they send an impulse along the cochlear nerve into the temporal lobe of the brain, where sound is interpreted. This is Pat Lurie reporting.
Ultimately, the inner ear is not only a mechanism linked to hearing, it is also the center of the body's sense of equilibrium. Within the ear, the vestibule measures static equilibrium, or where the head is with respect to the pull of gravity while at rest. Basically, which way is up when you're standing still. The semicircular canals measure dynamic equilibrium, which are the angular or circular movements of the head. It allows you to keep your balance when your head is moving. The reality is, your ability to absorb and understand everything you've heard and seen in this program is proof that your information superhighway works. The brain and central nervous system make up an immensely powerful system of intellectual and physiological hardware and software. They comprise a system that provides you with an extraordinary database containing millions of pieces of information. Every instant of every day, keystrokes of information are being transmitted throughout your nervous system. Neurons are firing off electrical impulses around the body, each with a cause and effect relationship. Everything from joyousness to genius has its roots in your brain and nervous system. But as immense as the brain's capacity is, are we using our brain to its fullest extent? What can the brain do that we haven't even considered? Why do we dream? Does the brain define self? What we do know is that the brain and nervous system are the core of who you are, what you feel, and what you believe. They are truly your information superhighway. Thanks for joining us for The Human Body. I'm Mike Dowling.